What's good, everybody? Welcome in to a sort of special, sort of random edition of the Power 2 podcast presented by Get Defense Sports Network. As always, I'm your host, and in this situation, I am here by myself. Um, had some things to do this weekend, had some scheduling issues, and then when we did sit down to record, well, my internet got checked out, as what is seeming to be way too common. But I had to talk about Penn State, Texas. I had to talk about Penn State and Texas, not Penn State, Texas. They didn't play each other, and so I'm here on a quick little solo thing. DJ is also going to come back solo as well because she wants to talk about the WNBA and Nafisa Collier ethering Kathy Engelbert. But yeah, so you just have me 10, 15 minutes going to talk about what happened. If you've listened to this podcast, you know one thing. I do enjoy being right. Not entirely in my personal life. Like saying that comes across as like a crazy thing. Like I'm just one of those like asshole people who are always like, I was right, I was right, I was right. But when it comes to football, and even more specifically when it comes to having a differing opinion than national media who sort of get paid to do this while we do this for fun. It is nice to be right about something that a lot of people doubt or sort of disagree. And to start with Texas, one of them being all off season, right? We don't know about Arch. No one knows about Arch. But also, more importantly, there was this sort of um, this upswell. Everyone sort of, it sounds like I have, a syndrome where I want people to come after me or whatever, but like um, people want and wait for Ohio State's downfall. So when you talk about Ohio State and Texas this offseason, it was Ohio State lost 14 draft picks. It was Ohio State has a new quarterback. It was Ohio State this, that, and the third. One of which being a lie. People, straight up saying that Ohio State's offensive line was going to be bad. And for me, that was like, okay, you're clearly not paying attention. You don't realize who they have coming back. You're not doing your job well. And in the interest of not doing your job well, there was a lot of people who just sort of assumed that Texas was going to be amazing. A lot of that being on Arch. But one thing that I sort of repeated and repeated to where it became a running joke, especially with DJ, is that Texas's offensive line was losing four starters. And that in college football, you cannot assume that offensive line is going to be good. And football in general, right? Offensive line is very important. Look at what happened. Look what happened to Andrew Luck. Look at what's happening to Joe Burrow. Look at sort of, I mean, Patrick Mahomes may be the rare example, but look at what's happening to Patrick Mahomes, where like, yes, statistically he's still doing good. Yes, somehow they still won 15 games last year, but he's sort of running for his life. And you have the look at what's happening to CJ Stroud with the Texans, his first year versus the 2 years after that. But even more so, like these are the best of the best, right? These are the 32 best quarterbacks, and really the 15, the 17, the 20, because it seems like 12 quarterbacks who are not good in the league every year. So these are the 20 best, the 10 best, the five best quarterbacks when you talk about Joe Burrow and you talk about Patrick Mahomes, and they are struggling behind a bad offensive line to the point to where Patrick Mahomes had to go get an offensive lineman this year, and that has sort of been better. So, but it's even more important in college because you don't have the 10 or 20 best quarterbacks in the NFL. You're dealing with first year starters, you're dealing with freshmen in some cases. And so, this sort of assumption that Texas was just going to rebuild and that they were going to be great when they lost four offensive linemen, two of which had been starting since they were freshmen because Texas had an offensive line problem, I thought didn't make sense. And so going into the game, we were having a conversation with podcast, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I called this because I didn't. That would be crazy. But what I did say was Florida is better than people think. They were losing games because of their offense, but their offense threw five interceptions against LSU, and LSU barely won that game, right? LSU won that game though because their quarterback was better and he was able to make one or two plays, right? Florida struggled. Sorry, Miami struggled against Florida, and it's had them in hell for a while because of their defense. And Miami won that game ultimately because Carson Beck was better and he was able to make a couple of plays. And the one thing that I said to pay attention to is if Arch cannot make plays like Carson Beck did, right, for Miami, and like Garrett Netzmeyer did for LSU, that Texas could be in trouble. And what happened? Arch Manning didn't make those plays, right? He didn't make those plays, and the Texas defense made those plays. And I do believe the other thing that I said is that DJ Lagway was due a game, and he had that game. He finally had that game. This is not a precursor that I think Texas is going to be good, that they're going to do things. Although it would be hilarious if they were, because then we have the same thing that happened 2 years in a row where DJ Lagway plays good. He saves Billy Napier's job for another year, and then you go into 2026 with Billy Napier on the hot seat for like the third year in a row. But when it comes to Texas, all of these sort of assumptions that were made that, in my opinion, Texas hadn't earned, right? I think when you put it in the lens of Ohio State and the lens of Alabama, sort of Georgia, although Georgia's sort of starting to lose that this year, is that people forget how hard it is to never rebuild, always reload. And so they put this ability to reload on teams who haven't earned it, right? Texas hasn't showcased the ability to reload because they had never lost anything. Like Texas hadn't been good for a while. So the last 2, 3 years that they've been good, this was the class. Like if you remember, I know it's hard to believe because it's Texas in the last couple of years, but if you remember 5 years ago, Texas was on like a 5, 6, 10 year streak where they hadn't even had a first round draft pick, right? So the last 2 years is when they first had first round draft picks. So for the first time in, let's just call it a decade, Texas is having to reload or rebuild because they just hadn't had good players. So this year, when they lose Arch, they lose 4 offensive linemen. And one thing that I remember saying in the offseason is they lost a lot of key players that you didn't want to lose who still had eligibility. Their running back still had eligibility. Matthew Golden still had eligibility. Jade Barron, the corner, still had eligibility. And unlike Penn State, who I'm going to get to, those players didn't come back for a championship. Those players basically said, "Hey, I've had my 2 years. We went to the Final Four twice, one in the 14 playoff, one in the 12-team playoff. I'm gonna go get this money." That's no shake to them, but they didn't stay. So not only did you lose your seniors, you also lost players who could have come back and fought for it. And so there was this assumption that Texas was just going to be amazing and that they were just going to figure it out and it was just going to work. And I question that. Now I still had Texas in the playoffs, and I still had Texas and then in the maybe even in the national championship game. But I said that they're not going to be this sort of far and away thing. So much of their success needed to hinge on Arch being good. Well, Arch is not good, right? This is not to say he won't be good in 2 years. He won't be good in 5 years. But one thing that I think that I want to get across on this point is that sports are hard. Football is hard, but there are some things that just aren't hard, right? There are some things that are really sort of easy to say. And one of them being, if you don't have a good offensive line, you may not be good, right? Texas also lost all of their studs on the defensive line where they had to bring in 4, 5 transfers. Like if you're, and I hate to keep bringing up Ohio State, but if you're an Ohio State fan, you know this, right? We were complaining because every defensive tackle that we were going after, Texas landed because they were losing all of their defensive tackles, right? And so it's just one of those things where like it was just sort of assumption that Arch was going to be amazing, and this assumption that they were just going to reload in all these key positions, offensive line, defensive line, and all these sort of things, and they didn't do that. When Arch has not looked good at all this year, and Florida, like the SEC, is not as tough as they want to be, but they are tough, and Florida is a tough out. We saw that with LSU, we saw that with Miami, and they were able to survive that. And then the other thing about not being hard is I said this, I said all offseason, I said either one of two things is true. Either one, Arch was better than Quinn, and Steve Sarkisian did not play his better quarterback when he was trying to win a national championship, which is horrible for Sark. Or Arch was not better than Quinn. And we saw that Quinn got almost went undrafted. And so we have all this hype around Arch. And so for Arch to be the king who was promised, Sark has to be a bad coach who wouldn't play his better quarterback. Or Arch was never the king that was promised. And it's starting to seem to lean towards Arch was just never the king that was promised, right? And so Texas loses. They now have 2 losses. They're 3-2. They're no longer in the AP top 25. And with their remaining schedule, which I'm going to pull up, I don't know it off the top of my head. With their remaining schedule, I think it's probably fair to say that they are not going to make the playoffs, which no one predicted. I sure as hell didn't predict that, no matter what I want to say about how I felt about some of the struggles in dealing some and some of that stuff. I thought that they were guaranteed to make the playoffs, and I think the a conversation that we're gonna have to have later that we can have on the show when everyone comes back is that how egregious is it for you to miss the playoff in the 12 team era? You know, like we talked about it with Penn State previously. I think me and Dante did on the I-80 football show where we talked about how um, more years than not, Penn State is going to make the 12-team playoff because it's a 12-team playoff, right? So how egregious is it, just in general, for Texas not to make the playoff? But even more so, how egregious is it for them to miss the playoff in a year that they were supposed to be a national title contender, right? Like I think that is something worth considering, um, because it is crazy for them to have missed the playoff in a year where people thought that they were going to win. And this is not the 14 playoff where one loss gets it. It's the 12-team playoff where you really need to lose 3 games. And by losing to Ohio State, and now Florida, Texas puts himself in a place where it's almost guaranteed that they're going to lose another game because Arch isn't good. They follow Florida immediately with Oklahoma. They should probably win this game, but there's no guarantee that they will. And the reason why I say should is because Oklahoma's starting quarterback is out, but there's no guarantee that they will. Then if they Kentucky, Mississippi State, they'll probably win those. Vanderbilt is tougher than expected. They play at Georgia. Georgia beat them twice last year. They play Arkansas, and then they finish with Texas A&M, and Texas A&M actually looks good. So you look at the schedule and you say, okay, they're probably going to lose at least one more game. Could it be two? Could it be three? Could we have a 7-5, 8-4 Texas? That's no longer off the table with how bad Arch has looked. Because is he good enough to get through an SEC schedule? And so far, the answer has been no through five games. So that's that's Texas, and that is less than ideal. Penn State, and I want to be consistent. Now, Penn State is in a similar but worse situation, if you ask me, and that's because I want to be consistent to something that I said in the offseason, and that Penn State told us. They told us that they were going to win a national championship. They told us that they were going to be the 2025 version of 2023 Michigan and 2024 Ohio State. They said that our quarterback came back so he could win a national championship, that our 3 year starting running backs came back so they could win a national championship, that our second tier, second best pass rusher, that our linebacker, that our this safety insert, all of these players, they did the announcements, they did the whole thing. Their coach came out and said that they can win a national championship. They had the hype to be the number one team in the nation coming in, and all these sort of things. And one thing that I said before, again, to continue bringing up Ohio State, but it is what I know best, that Ohio State has never been given the out, right? If Ohio State, whether Ohio State says they're national championship or not, they are. When you were in conversation, I mean, look at what's happening with Alabama, right? They lose one game. They lose 3 games last year. They lose one game this year to Florida State, and everybody's ready to be done with it because that's the standard of the program. And so when Penn State says that they want to be in that standard, they want to be held to account like Ohio State, they want to be held to account like Alabama, they want to be a national championship contender, they want to be all of these things, then I think that we, whether that's fans, whether that's media, which I am not, but the media, if any of them hear this, whoever that is, needs to hold them to that standard, right? Yes, Texas is also at that standard, but Texas lost all of their players, right? Like, if it wasn't for the Arch Manning thing, people would be okay with Texas taking a step back, right? Like saying like you lost your 3 year starting quarterback, you lost 4 offensive linemen, you lost 2 running backs, you lost 2 wide receivers, you lost 2 or 3 defensive tackles, a defensive end, you lost your All-American starting corner. Like these are all the people that Texas lost, right? If it wasn't for Arch Manning and this sort of fake belief that Texas was going to be an amazing program. I believe that again, I bought into because I did think that they would um, rebound a little bit. I didn't think they were going to be as high as people were saying, but regardless of point, if we would have looked at Texas objectively, we could have seen how this could have happened. There's no rhyme or reason why this should be happening to Penn State, right? Penn State loses to Oregon in double overtime. at home in the whiteout, right? That's a game you have to win. Oregon is another one of those teams that people were back and forth on because of who they lost. They lost their starting quarterback. They lost two running backs. They lost wide receivers. They lost people on defense. And then on top of all of that, they lose a safety um, and the best wide receiver in the offseason. So they're coming in young, right? Young, the best wide receivers are freshmen. Their quarterback has 5 games underneath him. They have 2 transfers at running back. They have young offensive line. Like they're young everywhere. And so this is a team that people weren't sure about. This is a team that people were saying, yeah, it's working. They're probably going to be good, but maybe not in the national title contender. Again, Penn State wasn't that. So Penn State goes and loses this game. And then it's like, okay, well, that's a loss. We saw Ohio State lose 2 games. You still have these other people on the schedule. Even if you lose to Ohio State, which would be devastating for you to go into another season where you were a title sort of favorite, even if it would be devastating for you, at 10-2, you can still make the playoffs. To lose to the worst team in the country, and not even just so I went back and I watched that game again. It's not even just that they lost, right? It is that they were dominated, right? Like from start to finish, they were dominated. And there are things that typically happen. Like I was listening to a podcast and I heard them say that Penn State got themselves in too big of a hole that they couldn't dig out of. That's not true. That's not true. There were multiple times in this game where Penn State was down 6 and they had the ball, right? They go down was they go down 7. It doesn't matter. They go down, they score. It's 14-27, I believe it is. And then, hold on. I'm actually going to just pull up the game script so I'm not lying because I think it's important to show sort of how this goes. Okay, so sorry, they go down 7-0. UCLA kicks the field goal. Sorry, gets the onside kick, and then they kick a field goal, 10-0. Penn State scores 7-10. At that point, game could be over, right? You had your cute little 10 minutes. Now it's our ball. We scored. We're back at it. It's cool. Instead, they let UCLA go down and score again, and then they go down and score again, and then it's 24-7, and then they go down and score again, and it's 27-21, 27-7. It's like, okay, boom, game's over. If this is the hole that you say that they couldn't dig out of, all right, except after they make it 14-27, they immediately score again and make it on a blocked punt. Yeah, it was a blocked punt. So they scored 14-27, and the very next drive, they block a punt and they score. It's 21-27. At that point, Penn State has all the momentum. Again, it's a one-score game. You can come back from this. You can win. You're Penn State. You should out talent them. Your defense should be able to stop them. They had their cute little moment, but now the game is in hand. And every time the game got close, they let UCLA score. And that is the most embarrassing part, right? So to follow the rest of the game, it's 27-21, and then they score. It's 34-21. Penn State scores. Now it's 6 again, right? Again, this is at 14 minutes and 26 seconds in the fourth quarter. You are down 6. You have this vaunted defense. You have Jim Knowles. You have all these players. You have the Dennis Dennison. You have Zane Durant. You have these linebackers. All of these things. It's supposed to be better than UCLA. UCLA, again, was one of the worst teams in the country. To parrot the points that everyone is saying everywhere, UCLA didn't lead not a single time, not a single singular second. And all the games that they played, they had a lead. Not a single. So that's to be a team that you should be able to stop eventually. You have a whole fourth quarter, you're down 6. Instead, what happens? Immediately, they let them score. And so it's just kind of like, no, Penn State didn't put themselves in a hole that they couldn't dig out of. They just lost the game. They just didn't play good defense. They didn't spy Nico. Literally, you had so many times where it's like when you think about the Penn State defense and who they're supposed to be, you think this is the team that if they go up on you or you have them in a third, they have you in a third and long. You're not supposed to pick that up. You don't pick that up against most people, but against this team, this pass rush, this coach, this coordinator, these players, this roster. And what happened? There's at least 3 different times where Nico picks up a third and long, and not only just picks it up, he gets like 20 plus yards, right? Nico was throwing some of the best he's ever done. And the most embarrassing thing, like shout out to the kid, shout out to the I was gonna call him a kid, but he's older than me. Shout out to Jerry Newhauer. I think that's how you say his name. Never called plays before. He's 33, never called plays before. He literally came out after the game and was like, half the time I kept forgetting to flip down my microphone, or I kept forgetting to um or else forget to press the button. For those of you who don't know, like a coach can't have two microphones. That doesn't make any sense. So they have a system where he can talk either to everyone, and then there's a button that he can press where he can talk to the quarterbacks. And he kept saying he would forget to press the button to talk to the quarterback. That's who you lost to. You lost to the worst team in the country. You lost to a team that didn't have a lead at all, not 1 second of a lead in any of their games. You lost to a team that fired the head coach and both coordinators. You lost to a team that had a 33-year-old guy who's calling plays for the first time and didn't know, like, kept forgetting how to do it. Like just the structural things of calling plays, and you got dominated. Like UCLA did whatever they wanted to. You know what I'm saying? Like UCLA ran for. Let me see if I can find it. That's the only problem with this website. They ran. I'm gonna find the total. UCLA ran for over 200 yards. I can tell you that. UCLA. Oh my gosh, that's worse than I thought. UCLA ran for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns on 5.6 yards per carry. And you can say a lot of that was Nico, and it was. He ran for 128 yards and 3 touchdowns. But the other running backs were also running over 4 yards per carry. Nico threw for 166 yards and touchdowns. They just moved up and down, up and down. And to make matters worse, they couldn't do anything on offense. Drew Aller led the team in rushing, 78 yards, because they couldn't like Drew Allen's not a runner. For him to like, and as bad as he was, because he was bad, he's the reason why some of these things are happening. He was also arguably the best player on the field because the rest of the team looked like it gave up. And if they hadn't had him, this would be even worse because he was running for first downs. He was putting the team on his back and orchestrating some of these drives in ways that didn't entirely make sense. And so it just creates this sort of really weird situation where like again to do the thing with Texas with Penn State with their schedule, like they still have to play Iowa at Iowa. There's a bye week in between. Okay, there's a bye week in between. So next week they play Northwestern. We expect them to beat Northwestern. We're not gonna go down this rabbit hole and say that they're losing to Northwestern. I think that's a step too far. But then they play at Iowa. That's not a cakewalk. There's a bye week, which is nice. But then they play at Ohio State and Indiana. They could easily lose all three of those games. They could easily lose at Iowa with the way their offense is playing. They should lose at Ohio State. And we said on this podcast beforehand that they're probably going to lose to Indiana. That's three more losses. And then you look at Michigan State. Michigan State's not better than them, but Michigan State's better than UCLA. And why couldn't Aiden Childs do to them what Nico did, right? You look at Nebraska. Nebraska's not better than them, but Nebraska's better than Michigan State and UCLA, and they have a better quarterback who's not going to run that much. But that secondary was nothing. So it's just at this point, anything is possible. Anything is possible for Penn State, including 5, 6 losses. Because what happens when a team gives up, or what happens when the players who came back solely for the NFL is like, this is no longer helping my NFL. And the last thing I want to say on Penn State and I understand that it sounds like sour grapes when an Ohio State fan or Ohio State site or media or whatever says, hey, there are these legitimate concerns with Jim Knowles. It sounds like you're just like, oh, you're just mad that we took your guy and you're just downgrading him because you're mad that he's gone. And I'm sure there was some of that, but at the same time, all the issues that Ohio State fans said with Jim Knowles, the fact that he doesn't adjust, why didn't he spot Nico at any point? The fact that he gives up big plays all the runs. Like if his game plan, he has some of the best game plans, but if his game plans don't immediately work, they never win. That's how we lost to Michigan all those times. That's how we lost to Georgia. You can just hit the same. You can just hit the repeat button against Ohio State. That's how we lost to Oregon the first time. You can hit the repeat button against Ohio State because he doesn't adjust. The sort of stubbornness, the sort of lack of pressure, pass rush based sort of in the design of his defense, the confusion. Everyone's told, oh, the defense is too complicated. The players don't know what to do. I remember in the game, there was a time where it was a 3rd and long, and they criticized him because he ran a safety blitz from deep, and he tried to disguise it. And he's like, by the time the safety would get here, the play's over. And so, like, all of these things are true. And Penn State fans just thought we were talking about sour grapes. And the thing is, at Ohio State, it wasn't that bad because we had better talent. Penn State doesn't have the talent that they normally have. And so they're struggling in this complex defense, this defense that if the game plan doesn't work, if he doesn't adjust with this stubborn coordinator. And yeah, in 2 years and 3 years, whatever, if that staff is still there, the defense is probably going to be spectacular again. But even when Ohio State's defense was spectacular, there were always games. There were always people that could hit the right button and just torch this defense. And so it may have sounded like sour grapes, but it was valid complaints, and now the Penn State people are echoing those. So, I mean, college football is the greatest sport in the world. You have two teams who are 1 and 2 in the country, two teams that people are picking to win a national championship, to play in a national championship, to send all these players to the draft, to do all these things. And Texas and Penn State, and both of them lost in week 6, and they both have 7 games left with like clear flaws. That's it for this little special solo episode. We will catch you next week with the triple option again. Uh, the 3-man weave. We will be back. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.